Welcome back to Analysis, where we've been discussing the UK-US extradition treaty in the wake of the Abu Hamza trial. In this half of the programme, we'll be talking about the implications of the reforming of the extradition treaty on the British legal system and how effective the UK's current extradition treaties are. My guest from part one is still with me. Bill, what do you think? Do you think the government's just shooting the breeze here, or do you think it is actually going to try and change the law?
Well, I mean, we've seen Cameron's statement, but he didn't say anything specific at all. And the thing is, in this country, that actually it's not the politicians who take the decision, as it is in some countries, but here it has to go immediately to the Westminster Magistrates Court, which is the court that hears all the extradition cases. And then you do have an appeal, so that is going to take some time. And as a matter of fact, to get the hearing on it, Westminster, etc. So unless there was a serious cutback in the right to have the case determined by an independent court, I don't know quite what he's talking about. But I think there are two fundamental problems. I think one is with the whole extradition structure since 2003, that is the Extradition Act as a whole. And I think the second is the fact that the government is putting a block in a number of cases on Secret Service evidence or evidence of the involvement of the Secret Service. And the other case, which is going on as we speak, is Alexander Litvinenko, where the government has been refusing to hand over Secret Service evidence to the inquest. And now the issue is whether there should be a public inquiry. But in fact, nothing can happen in that case because of the fact that the evidence of perhaps collusion with the British government cannot come before the court.
Well, I mean, Hamza, as you were saying in the first part of the problem here is that all sorts of people are getting caught up in this process, and indeed, the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Mail are in a state of hysteria about these two people who are being extradited to America on fraud and money laundering charges, and the tone of the reporting is almost, well, you know, this is all right for a supposed terrorist, but for heaven's sake, you're just taking people who are just doing a bit of money laundering here. I mean, do you think that it's a weakness for the government that this is a catch-all piece of legislation which is affecting all sorts of people?
Yeah, the government seems to be quite shameless about the effect it's had on all British citizens, and they haven't fulfilled their promises. But I'm not sure Labour have actually particularly offered any promises about extradition reform either. Yeah, the right-wing tabloids have a very strange attitude in that they are against these extraditions, but then, I mean, the Daily Mail coverage of Gary McKinnon, which is called British Justice for British Citizens, you know, referred to Dulher and Barber as other unwanted guests. At the same time, the coverage didn't look at the Human Rights Act, which it didn't even mention it once, even though that was the piece of legislation which saved Gary McKinnon. And now the Conservatives want to scrap that too. I also think the other context now is the Conservatives and Labour are sort of pandering to the UKIP vote. So they want to look like they're tough on immigration and they're anti-Europe and all these type of things.
Masood, so does it look like, at least in the press, it's kind of one law if you're Muslim, another law if you're something else?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a racist aspect and xenophobic and Islamophobic aspect. I mean, here we had intervention for government, not towards Baba or Talha, who only were really alleged to have raised some funds through, you know, a few £100 funds through a website for people in Chechnya and indeed Afghanistan. And then on the opposite side, we got others who actually have admitted breaking into Pentagon and you know, they were actually, a deal was made for them not to be extradited. So it's been seen now by all that this is to be used against the Muslim community. And if we cannot sort of prosecute you here, and we don't have enough evidence to prosecute here, we're going to send you down to United States, or indeed in future might be deporting you to Timbuktu to be tortured and abused, and with a sort of a system which is able and capable of, you know, because of lower standards, etc., to deal with you. And this is actually, unfortunately, is a message that we are giving out. and in the name of justice and creating a safer society for ourselves in Britain.
Hamza, do you think that one of the things that will happen, or what do you think one of the things that's in the government's mind, or Cameron's mind, when he's talking about shortening the extradition procedure, is that it gives the families and relatives of people who've been wrongly accused simply less time to campaign?
Yeah, there was such a huge social movement built around Baba Ahmed's campaign in particular, that the internal police record said he had the same status as Stephen Lawrence within the Muslim community, and he got 150,000 signatures. All these people have been alienated from the lobbying procedure and the parliamentary procedures. And, you know, it has even... you had even pro-American conservatives and conservative backbenchers revolting. That also shines a line on the hypocrisies of the Conservative government, given all the things they said in opposition about extradition reform.
So, Bill, when you were talking before, you were saying that, and we didn't quite unpack that, you were talking about the role of Secret Service evidence in this. So how much of it do you think there is, and what effect does it have on the extradition procedure?
Well, I think there's just been, a series of cases recently which show that there is a pattern, part of which is the problem with extradition, part of which, of course, is the introduction of more and more closed hearings and special advocates, and secret trials and the kind of thing which used to be foreign to the legal system here, but now we see more and more of it. And as I said, in 2 cases at least, but more cases in fact, we have the problem of serious evidence which could affect the outcome very materially being withheld from the court or from the inquest in the case of Litvinenko's widow, because British intelligence might be in some way compromised. So, but we just see more and more of this, and what we heard just recently how this has really affected the case in the United States as well. Was
that an element in your brother's case?
Well, an element would have been the collaboration between the Crown Prosecution Service and supergrass called Sajid Bidat, who's been paid over $100,000 by the government to be a witness in over, I think, 20 different terrorism cases. And that relationship between him and the Crown Prosecution Service and the British government is something that should be brought into the British public domain.
And that was an element in your brother's case?
It will be an element, but he's been used against him. But the conversations between him and British intelligence and the British state are never going to be in public because that can't be brought forth in an American court of law. As much as the US attorney says we can show he has the greatest motivation to lie.
Masood, do you think that there is going to be, given the politics involved, given the secrecy of the secret services involved, given the political environment of Islamophobia in which this takes place, is there ever going to be a fair extradition process?
No, not really. And I think, we are seeing politicians, while in opposition, they sort of say that they're going to abolish it, but when they come in power, they're trying to push it forward even more vigorously. And the reality is that, our legal system is the one is suffering. The confidence of us in our legal system is being damaged, and we are creating a 2-tier system, one for Muslims, another one for everybody else. And these are the realities when you look at what has happened in the last few years. And when you look at even the way that Baba Ahmed was used and abused by police, beaten up, and our system failed him. We took the matter to Police Complaint Commission, we failed, and then when it went to a civil court, the Metropolitan Police put their hands up and they said, yes, we committed all those, but we won't apologize, even though one of the things they admitted was their officers put him in a position of sajda and then kicked him and said, where is your God? Now, these evidence and these realities are creating very clearly double the standard, which testify that Muslims are no longer equal citizens, and they could be shoved around the, be it sent to Middle East or to United States, and they will be deported while they're on holiday. These are the sort of, unfortunately, what is the picture that is being drawn for us for our future in this country.
Bill, are there more of these cases in the pipeline?
Oh yes, for sure.
Tell us about some of them then.
Well, I can't reel them off, I'm afraid to say, but without doubt, this is not an isolated case. There are systemic problems with the Extradition Act. So I think on the one hand, it's the problems with the situation where the court in this country cannot look at the substance of the case and see whether there is real evidence against the person whose extradition is requested.
Why is that? Because you'd think in any sort of fair extradition procedure, an absolutely elementary judgment has to be reached about whether this is kind of made-up accusations or weak accusations, or whether there's a substantial case to answer, and therefore this person should go and face trial somewhere else. Why is that not a consideration?
This is all to. I mean, in fact, this was all to do with speeding up the process. In fact, so that one wouldn't have a full
speeding
trial.
up got us here.
So, yeah, absolutely. So the 2003 Extradition Act is all about that. And the fact is that the only real bar at the moment is if it can be shown that the state which is requesting extradition actually wants to put the person on trial for something quite different. So at any rate, that something's got to be offence in both countries, and the state requesting has got to stick to their request. I mean, those are safeguards to some extent, but at the end of the day, it means that most people whose extradition is requested are going to be extradited.
Just tell us what the conditions now are for your brother and what the campaign's now doing.
So Dala's in a death row prison. He's been in solitary confinement for since October 2012. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and American Civil Liberties Union recognise those conditions as torture and wish to abolish it, even if the European Court of Human Rights is in contradiction with that. In terms of campaigning, I don't just do it for Talha, it's because it's a terrible situation for all British citizens, and I'm very closely connected with Gary McKenna's mother, and we still continue to campaign to change the law, and so that it doesn't, the nightmare that it's caused our family doesn't affect anybody else in the future, and just create a more civil, just place for British citizens in future.
Masood, can you understand a system where the actual, whether or not there's a substantial case against a person isn't taken into consideration when they're extradited?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
Do you think there's enough understanding that there is now in place an extradition system which doesn't take into account any substantive argument about whether or not there's a case against this person, or whether they're just false accusations or hearsay or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on one side is what you're saying is very worrying. The fact that no case needs to be presented, as Bill said, just a police officer put in a warrant of arrest. But I think it's even more fundamental, the fact that these crimes have not been committed in United States. These crimes were committed here in Britain, and indeed there are crimes in Britain, and it's an abuse of our system for us not to actually deal with criminals allegedly committing crimes here and waiting for them to be requested by United States or by Timbuktu. And I think that is actually really the fundamental aspect of this. We are not dealing with the problems here of alleged crime and actually bringing it to justice, and is actually shortcoming of our system. There is another argument, as you rightly say, is the issue of is there actual proof for people to be uprooted from here and sent overseas? And I think when we put both of these together, it seems that extradition is becoming a tool of creating fear and torture within the communities. I mean, let's face it, Baba Ahmed spent 8 years already in prison. And, Talha just slightly shorter than that. And their families, if anyone has got any contact with them, will know that they are suffering tremendously. So the whole, not only those family feeling the pain, but indeed the Muslim community feels that they could be next.
Mm. Bill, how unusual is the US-UK extradition treaty? Do other countries have similar relationships with the US, or is this a kind of one-off?
Well, many countries won't extradite their own nationals. Actually, a large number of countries in the world, a good example being Russia. And under its constitution, they will not and cannot extradite Russian citizens. So we're a bit of an exception in that we extradite our own citizens. So, I think that is one fundamental issue.
And is this true with European comparisons as well?
And in Europe, we have the European arrest warrant. So this is, Council of Europe extradition treaty and the European arrest warrant system as well.
That's between European countries?
Yeah, between European countries.
And what about the relations
already
with
greatly speeded up. So then it depends on the extradition treaties that we have with other countries, and there are many, different treaties with different countries. And this one has been controversial. However, the inquiry which the government called into it, because there was such an uproar, found actually, although many people disagree with this, that there's not so much difference, and the standard is very much the same.
Between the European ones and the US ones?
Between the British and people do get extradited from the United States to Britain, some of whom are American citizens. But the test in the United States is stronger than the test here before they can be extradited. Nevertheless, they do get extradited.
So let me get this straight. So we have an extradition treaty with the US,
yeah.
And within that treaty, it is actually more difficult for the UK to extradite a US citizen to a court here than it is to go the other way.
Because of the difference in American law.
That's
right. But the argument of the government is, in fact, in both countries, the test is the test on whether a police officer can arrest a suspect. Simply in the United States, a police officer needs a bit more in order to arrest a suspect than a police officer would do here. That is the argument. Actually, I think most people would say that the imbalance is more severe than that. If I can be permitted, by the way, you haven't asked me this question, but I was really shocked with the Daily Telegraph's headline yesterday, which, as we've already looked at, what that seems to be saying is that there ought to be a distinction between people in Britain who are pensioners from Northampton, who are white, and people...
That's the case of these two.
Yes, the case of the Dunhams.
Who are...
As against people like Abu Hamza. That I think is really dangerous. So a suggestion that there should be two different systems of law.
Well, I mean, what the Abu Hamza case has done is to license the expression of what is, in any case, a reality. Would you say?
Yeah, these media bogeymen are quite useful to push forward authoritarian legislation and so forth. Yes, yes, I'd agree with you. Yeah.
Masood, do you think that Cameron is actually going to do this, or is he just having a free populist pop on the back of the Abu Hamza case? But as Bill has said, it isn't actually the politicians that do this. So, can you see him actually getting on with this?
Well, as regards the shortcut in extradition, I think it's going to happen anyway, because the arguments of every case going to European court is not going to happen, and they're not objecting on a basis of sort of torture in the United States. But I'm even more worried on the issue of removing citizenship, which is even more bizarre. And Cameron is basically saying they're going to do that. And the connotation for all these is extremely Islamophobic and racist. And the Daily Telegraph, I agree with Bill, is horrifying. But the reality is that this is exactly what everybody thinks and accepts. And I think that is what is more frightening than one extreme right-wing paper putting a couple of sentences like that.
Bill, I mean, is there any challenge that could be made? Because it's a kind of additional punishment, isn't it? That if you're guilty of a crime and you're under a possibility of being deported, that this can be part of the kind of punishment rather than the normal legal process of you're accused of this, you're found guilty, this is the sentence?
Well, as I say, I think it's part of a pattern, as a matter of fact, and I think that we do have a situation in this country, and we're not the only country, where procedural rights that have been enjoyed in the past are gradually being taken away, as a matter of fact, where one has increasingly not only a secret state with huge powers, but the invasion of the secret state into the judicial process. That is certainly happening. And I think at the same time a weakening of safeguards, for example, at the level of the European Convention on Human Rights. So I think all of that makes for an extremely dangerous situation.
Ham, do you think that's an accurate picture, that we're essentially, I mean, I guess what a summary version of this conversation would be is that there's a two-tier justice system emerging, which is, well, to use the language of the Macpherson report, institutionally racist?
Yeah, we seem to be creating a sort of domestic Guantanamo Bay as well, in terms of how long we... Because it's not just the issue of the extradition, it's also the issue of detention without trial. Barber was the longest detained without trial person in British history. Given those levels of powers in places like Belmarsh and Long Lartin, and also, even if you take the issue of terrorism trials generally, like a lot of the far-right terrorism is not treated in the same way, in that they're often given bail or not even called terrorists in the first place. So there is a disparity there between Muslim citizens. And agreeing with Masood, the next logical outcome of weakening and cheapening British citizenship is citizenship stripping itself. And we should have taken these extradition as a red light and a warning of the worst things to come under Theresa May's terrible Home Office record.
OK. Well, I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to leave this investigation of the effects of the conviction of Abu Hamza on the extradition system in this country. But I'd like to thank my guests, of course, for joining us, and for you at home for watching. Please do tune in again for future discussions. Don't forget, you can keep up with the discussion by following us on Twitter at the address below, or by following the Islam Channel Current Affairs team on Facebook. Until next time, good night.